Kimberly here, and today I want to show you this really cool technique that I'm calling water reactive coloring. I just don't know what else to call it, but all I did was ink a background and use water to create this amazing colored image in the background. I love the subtle tone-on-tone look, especially with that gold embossing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with some Distress Oxide inks because that's kind of the key to this technique working. And I'm going to start with my lighter color first, and I'm going to use the cracked pistachio. I'll apply the ink to my foam applicator and gently go to my paper in a circular motion and work that color in the center. I'm doing this lighter color to add some interest to the background. I'm also using watercolor paper because of the water I'm going to use after. Watercolor paper is two-sided, and so make sure that because we're going to stamp, you're using the smooth side. I put the wrong color out to start with first. Actually, the other color I used was the peacock feathers color, and I'm going to work on building up layers of this color all the way around my entire panel of cardstock, making the color as deep as I want. And I want a really deep, intense color because of this technique I'm going to use. One tip I wanted to point out is I use a Post-it note a lot of times to hold this in place so I don't get my fingers inky and so I don't get fingerprints in my background. You've got to let this dry. So not exactly 40 hours later, but you do need to let this dry for quite some time before you go ahead and try to heat emboss it. Because of the properties of the oxide ink, they stay wetter longer. Before I heat emboss something, I always use this little embossing magic, this little embossing buddy pad. It's an anti-static pad that has powder in it that you can see that'll help my flecks of embossing powder from getting all over. And it kind of makes a little mess, just wipe it away. But leave that powder sitting on there because that's what's going to help your embossing be really sharp and crisp. Now that I've done that, I'm going to use my mini MISTI here and use it to line up my stamped image. Now you can use this instead of an acrylic block, and I really like how this works. I'm going to use this large flower image from this Altenew set called Just Because, and it's so beautiful and so elegant. To place my stamp, I'm going to put it stamp image down onto my cardstock and get it lined up where I want. Then I'm going to close the lid on the MISTI. Oh, don't forget the magnets. You want to use the magnets to hold your paper in place so that it stays. And that's one of the keys to this really cool stamp positioning tool. Close the lid, push down gently, and your stamp will now be adhered to the lid. And now it'll stay perfectly in place and stamp exactly where you want it. I'll be using Versamark Watermark ink today to ink this up. It's my favorite ink to use for heat embossing just because it stays wet longer and it's clear. So I really like using that. Close the lid and push down and your image will be stamped exactly where you want it. Now, if you missed part of your image, you could go back and just line everything up exactly the same way again, and it would be ready to go. The embossing powder I'm using today is Stampendous Detail Gold, and the detailed powder is a finer powder. For images like this, you want a detailed powder because it will make the image show up more detailed. Other embossing powders can have larger chunks and your image won't be as crisp. Pour a lot of embossing powder over the top and then tap off the excess. I will slide all those extras back into the jar after, but now I have a perfectly covered image. I'll use my heat tool to go ahead and heat up the embossing powder, and I'm going to heat it so you can see here it goes from this flat color to a really bright shiny color, and I'll keep moving my tool so that I don't scorch my paper or burn my embossing powder. Now, here comes the magic, the part you've been waiting for. This is a basic water brush, and this reservoir tip holds water, and to get water out of the tip, you just squeeze. The one I love about this, or the thing I love the most about this, is the fact that you can take the top off and fill it instead of trying to squeeze it up. And this water brush is from MFT Stamps, and I'll make sure and link all the products that I'm using underneath the video. Now remember, we're using the Distress Oxide ink, and that's why we can do this. Distress Oxide inks are reactive with water, and that's what's going to make this all turn out so cool. I'm going to squeeze my brush a little bit and get water flowing from the tip onto my paper towel. Then I will apply the brush into one of the petals of my stamped image. The heat embossing really helps me control the water for this technique and lets me fill in my spaces with the water. Then I will pat off the excess water with a paper towel, and look at the way it lifts the color off and leaves this colored space behind. You can go back and repeat this process in the same spot a couple of times until you get the amount of color removed that you want. I did it several times just because I wanted it to be very intense results on these petals. You can see I'm just tapping away the water, and it's because it's lifting the pigment out of the ink because of the way it reacts to the water. Now, if you do this too much, you can end up pilling your color, so do it, but be real careful so that you don't pill up your watercolor paper. Now, for a little less intense color, I'm going to go over it just once and pat real gently. You can still see the color difference there, but it's just a lot more subtle than the first few petals that I created. I will continue this process all the way around the card through the whole image, going lighter and darker depending on my own personal preference of how I want the image to look. It's a lot of fun to play with this technique. And if you get a little ink on your brush, go ahead and use your paper towel and wipe it away so that you don't add color back where you removed it. And there you go. This water reactive coloring technique is absolutely amazing and beautiful. If you like this video, make sure you click the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more video tutorials like this on how to make beautiful cards quick and easy, click subscribe. Have fun trying this technique out.